151.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like a B flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
My name is Maddie Ulrich, and I'm the costume designer for...
Hi, my name's Annie Saunders, and I
Christopher
am
Roundtree. I'm
creating
the conductor
the rec
for
with
And
my
I'm
team.
Julian
and
Lemira,
directing.
and I am the set designer and costume designer.
I'm actually a visual artist in a performing arts.
I'm Kate Fry, and I'm the scenographer.
My name is
for
Missy
the rec.
Mazzoli, and I'm the composer.
I'm
for
Royce
the-
Fabric, and I am the
And I
librettist
really
for the
just
opera
love the
Proving Up.
heightened, high art quality of it. It's really
The
great.
capacity for invention.
I'll be designing the costumes and the space, the environment.
When you're dealing with a living
in
composer and all
collaboration
these
with the
living
team.
collaborators, no wonder opera is viewed as this art form where everything meets.
We are going to talk about your creative processes and I guess sort of what inspires you guys, because I'm here today with Diana Martinez, Dr. Diana Martinez, who is, from the film world. And then I'm here with my lovely roommate, Emma Westbrook. No doctor yet,
No.
but it could happen.
Maybe not.
Yeah, and she is a visual artist. Is
Yeah.
that how you describe yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to let you guys sort of give your own spiel about your work, why you do what you do, what you do. And you can go ahead and start, Diana.
Yeah, so I am currently the education director at Film Streams. I got my PhD in film and media studies from the University of Oregon a couple years ago. And then in my spare time, I am a podcaster, like everyone else.
Yes, yeah, it's easy and fun, so.
Yeah, and it's called Hollywood in Color, and it's about the history of people of color in the entertainment industry. So it's like I work for a nonprofit. I'm also an independent scholar and a podcaster.
Nice. And you, Emma?
I just graduated from college with a studio art degree and an art history degree, so I kind of like to both study art and make it myself. But in my own artistic practice, I'm primarily a printmaker, and so I make a lot of prints kind of using medieval imagery in like weird... That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
It's changed so much, and I'm really trying to find myself, so I don't
It's
really
a medieval
know.
phase.
Yeah, I'm really in a medieval
Got it.
phase right now. I really love illuminated manuscripts like a crazy amount, just because these monks are like locked in a room by themselves for like months on end, and so they go crazy and they draw really weird things. And I also I think that the medieval understanding of the world is really interesting, and I like to think about it in contrast to like the internet. So like I made a print that I actually just sold. It's like a image that I lifted from a Durr woodcut with like Clippy also from the Microsoft. I don't know, just a lot of things together. And mostly to sum it up, I'm kind of been thinking about like information dissemination and how we process information a long time ago versus now.
Cool. Do you find that you sort of have themes that you are talking about a lot, or that you're trying to sort of, I don't want to say project into your work, but I guess that you want to disseminate to your listeners or things like that?
Yeah, definitely. So like one of the things about like being in grad school is that you're basically working towards a dissertation, which is like a book project that you're writing in like a few years. And, you know, I was there for 7 years. And one of the things that you notice, like especially at the end, is how much you are always returning to those same questions that you asked at the very beginning when you were a little like a baby grad student. And you're like, oh man, I'm interested in like the same things. Like they just keep coming up in different iterations. Or you're like, oh, I have a crazy new idea. And you're like, no, that's actually the same thing. And so for me, it's always been about like the power dynamics in Hollywood that like women are encountering and that people of color are encountering. And I'm honestly like far less interested in like a content analysis type of thing. Like I don't care about whether a TV show is feminist or not, or whether or not like the representation is like good or not. Like what I really care about is like what's happening behind the scenes, right? Like how do these things get made? What are the studios thinking? Like how is the funding working? Like what is happening in the writer's room? Like I really care about all this behind the scenes stuff that people don't see, because that's really where like the product itself is the very last thing we have. It's the very last thing we see. It's all those other things beforehand, like all those structures that influence what is made. So for me, like that's the least of our problems. It's all the other stuff that leads up to those objects.
And do you want the audience to know everything that's going on before the product then? So it really is process over product for everybody is the end goal.
Yeah, and for me, like that's the question that I keep coming like up to, and that's also just tends to be the way that I think about things, and I just process things in normal life. Like I don't I care about like the behind the scenes stuff. I care about like the power structures that are happening, like the interpersonal relationships that like shape like the creative process. I care far less about the product itself, which is like good, you know, but like, yeah, I don't know why that is a question I keep returning to, but that is what I seem to care about.
Have you tried political science? 'Cause that's sort of how I think that was framed for me in school when I was doing political science classes. It was that you have, and they did a lot of visual art stuff for that. They said this is the product, but there are so many layers that went up to building that, and if you can't recognize the layers, you won't really know what the work is doing to you, good or bad, or how it's manipulating you.
It kind of like pertains to the way history is written too. Like can people who are historically marginalized even have any kind of place in writing the history of themselves, or you know, things that have happened to them at all? So
and you know, for me, like Hollywood is political. Like it's always been a super political space where it's playing out like what's happening in the world in this little microcosm. So like every issue on race and gender that we have in the real world is just amplified in Hollywood. And so for me, like that becomes really important. And there's like great scholars who have done studies like of the way we talk about Marilyn Monroe, right? Like all the different ways that biographers have dealt with her past. And it's really interesting to see how like the backgrounds of those writers influences the stories that we tell about them now. It's never just the story itself. And I'm interested in like those forces that shape that product.
Yeah, that's something that I'm sort of coming up against when I'm writing. I write a blog for Opera Omaha, and it does seem very product based when you're trying to market things. But I think if you're working with works that are hundreds of years old, what makes it special is how it was made and how people now can sort of critique that, because I think you need to sort of revamp the works, because what was going on contextually, socially then is not all what's happening now, or eerily it's too similar, and that's something you want to talk about, and you want to say this is what you can learn from it now. I don't know how you feel about process versus product, Emma, for your work in particular.
I don't know. I think for a long time I was really, really product based, and I would spend a lot of time on these like really intricate drawings with like ballpoint pen in high school and early college, and then I would never be satisfied with the outcome, and I just felt like I like put all this work into something that I hated. And so I'm with this new thing that I'm doing with the medieval art, I'm really trying to like experiment a lot more and just like kind of lift imagery from other places and spend a little less time on the like actual drawing part of it, because that's so labor intensive for me. And I'm also trying to kind of move away from reproducing images, like just drawing a picture, and starting to kind of draw from my own head. I've been looking at a lot of artists. The top one that comes to mind is Enrico David. I saw a show of his at the the Contemporary Museum of Art in Chicago. And he's this Italian dude who's just been making these like crazy sculptures and paintings and drawings of like creepy people for like 30 years, and no one's ever heard of him. And I just thought that his work was really cool because it doesn't look like anyone else's, and he's just, you know, making weavings and watercolors and huge paintings and tiny little sculptures and just like experimenting with all kinds of stuff straight out of his own head, and I really like that. So that's kind of the direction I'm trying to go in. So more process, less product.
Gotcha.
And what do you do to get out of your head? Or to get out of those influences, I guess.
Well, I've started just kind of like doodling a lot more. I get a really big pad of paper, and I like take a pencil and just start kind of making like surrealist type automatic drawing kind of thing, where I just try to turn off my brain. And it has become very like textural, and there's not much, I don't like it, but at least I'm drawing, you know, because I think part of the problem for me is I get so wrapped up in the product and whether or not it'll be good and whether or not I'll like it, that I just end up not drawing at all, because it's like, it'll never be something that I like. So as long as I'm drawing, I'm happy.
Yeah, it's like that creative paralysis.
Yeah, absolutely. What is it? There's like a French word for being paralyzed by the blank page.
That's the French.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, they do have a word for everything. They just capture it so succinctly.
It's like le
something.
de vide or something like
Yeah.
That sounds like it could be.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. And for you, you're not creating something visual.
Yeah.
So how does the process for you differ? Like when you say this is a subject I want to start working on, what does that look like to you?
So that looks like, honestly, the first thing that I do, so like the podcast is very like music based.
like music that you play in the podcast.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to like establish a tone for like the story that I want to tell. So I actually start, there's like this website that I source all my music from. It's based in Portland and it has like a lot of independent artists on there. So I just kind of like go through and like I listen to different like genres and I start getting a vibe for like, okay, this is the vibe that I want to have for this like episode on Whitney Houston, you know, like some like kind of retro 70s, some kind of nice like love ballads. Like what is this like audio story that I'm going to be telling? And then I kind of try to actually make a layout of like all the different what I call like beats that I want to hit in that story. So like what are the major turning points of like the episode? And kind of just construct them in that way. So it's much more, I don't know, like it's very research based, but at the end of the day, it has to be something that's entertaining to people, which is one of the reasons why I no longer wanted to be in academia, because scholars don't really care about entertaining others, even though everyone loves being entertained. And I think like it's these like audio things, like hearing music that you really like, telling a story in an accessible way, like that's what gets people interested and invested in the issues that I'm talking about. Because I try as much as I can to like not dumb it down for the audience. Like I trust that they can understand like the historical parallels between the 1930s and now, by like really making that clear. And the way you do that is kind of like through sound, right? Like when does the music drop off to make like a dramatic point? And so those are definitely like things that I think about, and sometimes they also happen afterwards. Like when I'm listening back to it, it doesn't quite fit what I wanted it to do, and I realize that another way would be better.
On your point, I wanted to ask you about entertainment. I feel like so often like art and entertainment are kind of like set in opposition to each other, and I don't think it necessarily has to be like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because I think like, especially like in what I do, so like I work in an art house theater, and so people think of like art house as like, you know, intellectual,
It's like highbrow,
elitist, highbrow, like all of these things, and then like, you know, Marvel movies are your mainstream box office.
They're your popcorn
entertainment.
films.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can just eat them over and over again.
Yeah, and I'm really interested in like, what if we look at these things in opposition to one another, right? Like, I was watching Doctor Strange the other day, and I was like, this is an aesthetic achievement. Like, this is a beautiful movie. I think it's one of the like better done Marvel movies aesthetically. You know, but we like never talk about like the technological prowess that goes into those movies. We just talk about like how dumb the content is or how illogical the plot is. But like those are art in their way, right? If we think of like the technology that they have to create in order to make these stunning like visual shots. And then something like The Favorite, like that is an entertaining movie as much as it's talking about like power dynamics and relationships and all of this stuff. Like it's a funny movie with like a ridiculous dance scene in it, right? That is purely there to like show the garishness and the like hilarity of this time, and it doesn't take that period seriously, which I really love. But you know, everyone's just like, oh, it's so wonderful because of the content and all of this stuff, but it's also fun. And that's why like people like it. And I think we forget that all the time, and I try to not let people forget that when I'm like teaching about these movies or when I'm trying to tell a story about the people who worked on them.
I think, you know, I feel like so often there's this weird narrative where it's like, if you enjoy it, it's not good. Like, you know, sure, you can watch like Tarkovsky's Stalker and watch all 3.5 hours of it. and it's worth your time because it's a good movie, but it's not a fun movie. It's like pretty long, but I feel like that in and of itself doesn't mean that it's like good. You know, same with Doctor Strange. Like, it can be a good movie, but also be fun. And The Favorite. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The Favorite, we need to go see that a second time because the first time it was really fun, but I wanted to sort of clue in on the auditory side more because
that soundtrack is amazing.
It was really good, and I was thinking about it when Emma and I were driving home, and I was like, oh, I gotta go back and listen to it again.
Also about music, like on the side, I run a music blog because music is so important to me, and it's like I read a lot about music, I download a lot of music, and it's purely like a pleasure thing for me, but it also really informs my artwork. And I'll often be like, because I'm coming up with stuff out of my head, I need like a little bit of texture to make that happen. So picking what I listen to when I draw is really important to inform the mood of what I'm doing.
That it's funny you should say that because I actually was going to sort of pivot to what other mediums you draw from that inform what you're doing. So for you, it's partially music.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of time. I knew that about you.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Like on my music blog, I really try to focus on kind of like lost or older records, especially like experimental stuff that's just like super weird, and a lot of times it's not good, you know, it's just somebody just like dicking around with a synthesizer. But it's just fun to like hear people who are really just doing their own thing, whether or not it's good, and they're going to release it, or it's not going to get released because it's not good enough to get released. But still it finds its way into my ears, and I get to kind of like hear that experimentation process recorded, which I really love a lot. So
do you if you're listening to something, is it, this might be a little too in depth, so I don't know if you think about it this way, but do you find that the sound is informing like the way you do lines, or are you coming up with images,
like
based?
color?
How is it, like if you had synesthesia, I don't know, what is happening?
What form would it take?
I feel like a lot of times it's mood. So like if I listen to like really intense like jazz piece, like I've really been listening to a lot of Alice Coltrane lately, like her music is so just like rich with all these crazy sounds. It'll be something like really small and really dense and like kind of like a little darker. But if I'm listening to like silly medieval, 70s folk music, it'll be like elves and things just walking around. I don't know. So
it does sort of manifest as a full image.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and I feel like I've always kind of operated like that with imagery and sound really being. That's why I love movies so much, because it's just like they really go together in my mind. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a music video director. That was like my dream.
That's very specific.
I know.
Wow.
But I didn't want to like direct music for like current music videos for current bands. I wanted to like revisit old songs and like remake the music videos for them. I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's also why I really like comics, because I think it's like my brain kind of works serially. I never am like, here's one still image, and that's something I'm kind of struggling with right now because it just takes a lot of work to make a lot of images back to back. But I feel like if I just do one thing, it's like an unfinished idea. I have to like kind of like give it a little bit of seriality or time or whatever. So
and I guess that's the nice thing about movies, is it does have a narrative sort of framework. So you, in theory, it's going to have a beginning, middle, end.
In theory.
And I feel like that maybe is part of the reason why sometimes people struggle with the more art housey feeling films, is that they diverge from that narrative flow. I don't know. That's a theory. I don't know if that's true, but even in The Favorite, which in theory was the ending was not. It wasn't I don't want to say normal. What would you say? It wasn't
It's an ambiguous ending.
Yeah. And sometimes people don't like that. That's not what they want to go watch. So, I don't know how you feel about that. Or I guess I can turn the sort of process, the same question I asked to Emma over to you. If you're listening to something, is that informing I guess your work is a little different, but so maybe you can sort of decide where you want to go with that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest influence on like what I'm working on right now is actually like biographies and memoir. I think like it would be really easy to turn to like other podcasts that are like doing similar things. There's so many like film podcasts out there or whatever. But like I'm really invested in like telling a story. Like I want it to have that arc, that beginning, middle, and end. And I like to think of like, I don't know, like as someone who really is like a biographer in an audio medium. Like I have to take all of these resources and kind of negotiate, like, what do I think is true? Like, what is more plausible? Like, so much comes up where I'm just like, I don't know. You know, there's so many like dissenting opinions about like this one event in this person's life. Like, and I have to kind of put together like what is happening here. So for me, it's like writing actually influences the audio more, because I think of like, if this was on a page, like how would it move from one thing to another? Does it make sense? And then how does audio kind of like flesh it out? But it's definitely like a written form.
Yeah, so you're sort of going the opposite way of the way Emma would go. So you go music, then form, you go form, supported by music, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. What is a project you're very proud of, and how did that come to be, and what are you going to do in the future?
Oh, man. Okay, so this is weird, but, like, I was really proud of my final paper that I wrote for art history. It was about the ethics of social practice art, and I wasn't taking any classes when I wrote it, and it kind of, like, took over my life, and I really felt like I was, for the first time in my entire life, like, synthesizing new ideas. Which it's silly that it took me till the very last year of college to do that, but I think it was a lot of skills that had to be built beforehand. And so I think that the ideas I was exploring there and the philosophers I was reading and whatever, I just really like kind of felt my brain expand, and I love that feeling. So it's making me think maybe I should go to art history grad school and do what you're describing with the dissertation. That sounds pretty fun. If it's something I want to write about.
Yeah.
The other thing that I made a project a long time ago now that I called Made with Love. It was like, I made it in my sophomore year of college, but I think I know. It was my freshman year.
Yeah, I remember
we were
it.
living together.
Yes.
Basically, every day for a week, I took a picture of my bed after I had woken up in the morning and when it was unmade, and then I embroidered on a piece of paper the drawing of the bed, which I think I really liked because I like embroidery a lot, and I still think it's like a cool visual effect, and so I kind of want to come back to that medium.
I loved that work.
I thought it was good. Yeah. So, what was the other question?
What are you going to do in the future? What's upcoming?
For the first time in my life, I'm drawing with pencils. So that's exciting. I've been smudging a lot.
Oh yeah, you need to get in that charcoal.
Yeah,
charcoal is the
that's
best.
too smudgy. It's too smudgy.
You just need some
Like
fixative.
Yeah. I don't know. Pencil. That's my new thing.
Okay,
Smudge.
there you go.
I'm not making prints right now, which feels kind of weird, but
Printmaking just is
so
a lot
time
of
and labor intensive.
Yeah, you have to have a specific place to do it.
Yeah. And then I think I want to try painting again because I haven't painted in a long time.
Cool.
Yep, that's it.
How about you, Diana?
What were the questions again?
It was work or a project that you were particularly proud of, sort of the process behind that, and then what you have upcoming that you want to talk about.
The project I was particularly proud of. A few years ago, I don't remember how long ago, but a few years ago I wrote a piece for The Atlantic on Jane the Virgin, which is like a very good show. If you haven't seen it,
that show.
You should watch it. And like I had written before for like a few like publications, but I think that was the one that I actually like. I was really invested in like a personal way. I think it turned out really well. It got like tons of views. Gina Rodriguez sent me a kissy face emoji on Twitter.
Isn't that a great feeling when you're like, oh, my senpai noticed me?
Yeah.
It's kind of
Yeah, but I think like that. I think that was the first time that I actually realized, like, I like engaging with an audience in this way. Like that I could actually use everything that I learned that is like a very specific knowledge set, but I could actually use that to like talk to people about what they're watching and why it's important and why like representation is important and all of this stuff. So I feel like that article is closest to like where I am now. Like it kind of like makes sense if you read that, like the project that I'm working on now. And the next thing is just more seasons of Hollywood in Color. I have a couple seasons planned out already. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of research. And then, my big dream for that podcast in general is to also do it in Spanish.
Yeah, that'd be very cool.
Which is a huge feat because it's the work of 2 people for 1 person, basically. Just for accessibility. And I think like so much of like the way we talk about like representation and stuff like isn't accessible to people, right? Like it's not in this other language that like so much of America speaks, for instance. And so for me, it's just kind of like expanding all the different ways that people can engage with the podcast. Like going back to what we were talking about, like, you know, art house versus mainstream, or like highbrow versus lowbrow.
Yeah.
And like one of the places where I see that in visual art is just like fine art versus like illustration or something.
Or like art versus craft.
Yeah. Like how does that ever come up like in your work? Like do you ever think like, oh, I want to make this, but no one's gonna buy this?
Well, it's like for me, it's like it's less about whether or not someone's gonna buy it and more about like my own hangups about fine art versus like not art.
Yeah.
I have had art professors like remind me that like the doodles that I do, that's art too. So I shouldn't beat myself up about not making anything when like every day I'm like knitting or sewing or whatever. I do all these like crafty things that I don't really like lump under my artistic practice because I'm not like making something to show other people or whatever. But I'm still creating stuff with my hands. And I think it's really easy for me to kind of internalize that cultural narrative and just write it off as like not even important at all. But I'm increasingly getting interested in the history of like weaving as art, because that's something that was like historically very gendered and something that's kind of like seen as utility rather than fine art. But I did a project for the Joslyn where I was researching Sheila Hicks and kind of looking at her influences. And she's so cool, and just kind of like the cultures that she's drawing on and the history of weaving kind of like, and different techniques all over the world. Like women have been doing this for thousands of years. And it's, so I built a little loom and I've been like kind of like making something on it with a scrap yarn, but it's slow. And yeah, I think about it a lot because I have to like actively remind myself to not
think
write it off
of those like divisions.
Because it's so funny too, because I think that the art world, like there's just such a hierarchy. It's like painting is number 1 and then sculpture, and then like down at the bottom there's like works on paper, and then at the very, very bottom there's like craft. And increasingly it's getting a little shaken up, but you know, there's a lot of progress to be made on that front. So, and it's funny too, because I kind of have a chip on my shoulder about it, because I study and I'm mostly interested in works on paper. And so works on paper and nobody cares about them because they're cheap and there are multiples, etc. But so I think that this like debate and question is something that's really important to me. I also think it's really cool that your scholarship is on things that, you know, are considered, like Jane the Virgin.
Oh yeah.
Is like, it's such a good show, and it's like it wrestles with a lot of ideas in this like telenovela-ish format that I think a lot of people consider to be lowbrow, right? And like not fine film or whatever, but it still has so much to say. So I think that's really cool.
I mean, like that was also part of the reasons why, like I really thought like when I entered grad school that I was going to be a professor, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I realized that like my interests are just like not what really scholars are interested about. Like it's incredibly contemporary. Like it's very like popular entertainment type of stuff. And I just didn't care to like only talk to another group of scholars about what this other group of scholars was interested in. Because like as much as like there are people working on like Jersey Shore, like in academia, like they're still like, oh, that's the person who works on Jersey Shore. You know what I mean? So like it's still trying to like convince them that like what you do matters, even though you have like the PhD and the pedigree and all of this stuff that says they should listen to you. And I just didn't feel like fighting that battle all the time. And I'm like, other people will appreciate what I do, which, you know, like I wasn't very good at like playing that game, which is part of why I think I'm not in it anymore.
That's part of the reason I loved the horror film class we did, the haunted house thing, because that was something that I had sort of been trying to get into just on my own free time. So I go on YouTube in my spare time and I just watch people review horror films. It's very weird. Emma hears me just with screams coming from my room all the time. And I was like, wow, this is amazing that there's a community place that I can meet other people that have this very weird niche interest, but we just want to watch and talk about horror films. And it wasn't necessarily, it was pitched really well, as in it didn't feel like I was in a college class, but it also didn't feel like it was being pandering. Like, I just felt like everyone had an interest and we wanted to hear about the history and sort of what made them up, or what sort of built these genres up. But then also we got to watch, I don't know, it was a great time. So
thanks, Lily.
Yeah, I'm just like, I stand those classes. So I think that's sort of really, I think that's important to have in a community, and I think that is sort of where you get away from the academia world and move more into just people are interested in this kind of thing, and but they want to have someone who is willing to put in the research and talk about it with them. So that's nice.
Do you feel like as an artist, like because of like YouTube and like Patreon and like all of these like, you know, independent like art sites where people can just like put their stuff up, like do you feel like these boundaries are breaking down more because people like artists can actually reach the consumers? So like someone like Lisa Congdon can become like super huge as like a fine artist and illustrator because of her blog.
I think it's funny because it kind of does break down the barriers, but at the same time, it really makes the problem of, as an artist, you have to be able to market yourself. You don't just, you know, create work. You have to like be your own little business. It makes that even more stark. And so just like all the research you have to do about how to get more Instagram views and YouTube views and whatever.
Everyone has to be a marketing minor
at
this point. It's a weird time.
So I think it's good, but it's also bad because it's like, I don't want to do that. I just am never going to be someone who like wants to like buy Instagram followers or whatever. And it just, it makes me feel bad. Like, is my art worse than the people who have more Instagram followers? No, they're just better at marketing themselves than I am. And that, you know, it's this weird thing that happens. So.
Oh my God, I feel that way so much. Like with like podcasting, like everybody, like it's really weird because it's like this thing where like, you know, if you have a phone, you can start a podcast, but it's also like people, like the podcast world is so saturated now that people are expecting a certain quality. So like, I could do that. But then you also like need a setup, like you need a soundproof room. Like it immediately like snowballs into this like more than a hobby because you're competing with other people who
have a radio
have no resources and yet are still like doing like this amazing stuff and they're like marketing the shit out of it. But like it's hard to think of like, I don't want this to be a business. Like I want this to be fun. Or like I took a break for a while because I was like just like I was depressed. I had a lot of anxiety and I kept thinking in the back of my head like all of the things that I had read, like you have to be consistent or else your listeners like will leave you and then no one will listen to your podcast. And I'm like, am I gonna come back and like no one is gonna download this? And like it's just like this weird like just anxiety. It's like that FOMO, right? Like if I'm not posting, if I'm not like making this my full-time job even though it's not my full-time job, like does it even matter? Like no, it's a hobby.
Yeah, but having it just be a hobby is not. You're sort of weirdly in the middle, and you want to be either. You want it to be your job, or you really just want to not worry about it. And being in the middle is really tough.
Being in the middle is the hardest part because you're competing with a lot of like you're better than the crappy stuff, but you're not as good as like the NPR stuff. Yet people are expecting you to be because it's not terrible.
I'm gonna say I just feel like podcasting is functionally turning into radio quality and that's sort of I think where they're becoming too similar in a lot of ways. I think podcasting in the beginning was a lot more casual. Like, do you agree with that?
Yeah.
And radio was, you know, you only listen to it when you're in the car and it's very nice, crisp audio. And now it's something different.
Well, it's funny too because I think both podcasting and like making art are like it's a like hobby side thing, whatever. but it's also like for an audience. You know, you can't just like do it in your room alone and just get the same gratification out of it. Like, I wish I could.
Well, that's
but
what
I can't.
Okay, but
I love talking to myself. I don't know.
That's what YouTube used to be, though. In its heyday, it was just people wanting to basically talk to nobody because they wanted to make funny videos
or sing the Numa Numa song.
Yeah,
and get millions of views.
And now it's we're getting into entirely different.
But like I have this weird complex about. I want to make art and not show it to anyone because that will prove that I'm a real artist who wants to make art for no one.
Yeah.
And I make art just because it's an instinct. But also, like, I get a lot of validation from people being like, I like your work.
Yeah.
So I do have to make it for an audience. So I've really been into like outsider art lately. These people who are kind of like locked in their room their whole life. Nobody knows what they're doing in there until they die. And then it's just this crazy thing like... There's one guy who like made an entire manuscript that's illustrated story of this land of like little prepubescent girls who like murder each other in like the 60s. He was drawing these and they're these like really intricate little drawings. It's crazy. And no one knew he was doing it until he died and they were like, what the hell is this? Okay. And it's just like, he's just doing it because he has this crazy compulsion and there's some weird psychological stuff going on in there. But I've just been really interested in that because I wish that I was like that. People who make like religious shrines in their basement out of tinfoil and like light bulbs and they're huge and then when they die they go into the garage and it's like, there it is. I wish I had that compulsion, but I just don't. So.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that term is like interesting, like outsider art, right? Just because they're not within like the institution of art itself.
It's like problematic because it's like that doesn't mean they're not an artist.
There was a whole exhibition about that actually recently that I went through. I don't remember where it was, but I'll send it to you anyway because it may interest you. But it really was highlighting this idea that people are not the norm, but then, and I think it was all after they died, which is really sad. They're like, oh, now we're going to support this type of work.
Well, and you know, I think that there's a lot of questions about privilege and accessibility in art education, and so you know, having them be their own category is not great. But I think it's also important to recognize that these people have no formal training because it might explain why their art is so innovative. Because it's like, you know, I feel like sometimes when you go to art school, you just end up making the same art as everybody else. And, you know, you learn about all these artists and you kind of follow these paths that are set out for you in art history or whatever. And so to have them just be doing their own thing, I think is mostly what I admire about that is it's just totally outside the narrative of art history.
The sort of, I guess it sort of worries me in some ways, the idea of being an outsider, quote unquote, because then I wonder what is it bad to not have things from my life or things that I consume media wise influence what I'm doing? Because if you're watching things and you're inspired by things but it's not reflected in your work, then it just feels like a weird disconnect to me.
Well, I feel like it's totally impossible to consume something and not take it into your you know.
I would think,
and I'm sure these people were like reading books and doing whatever that. Like,
but they somehow still managed to maintain this otherness, which I think is interesting. Because I don't think that anything that I've ever written in my life has not been influenced by something that I was watching. So back in the day, this is kind of embarrassing, but I went through a really heavy vampire phase.
Who didn't?
It was a time. I was
among one of the first adopters of Twilight.
Congratulations.
I read Twilight in 6th grade.
That is really early.
I know, like the day it came out.
Wow. I like that you say that with pride.
I mean, that's the way to do it.
I knew it before it was cool.
But yeah, I then was looking back on an old hard drive of all of my old writing, and everything from that time period was completely reflective of what I had watched so it was like, well, I had something special about the way I was doing it, but it wasn't really special because it was still tied into that. And so that's something that kind of scares me as far as my process if I start writing in the future is, am I just regurgitating what's part of the times? Because that's not really special.
Like trying to turn my brain off when I draw, so I'm not just recreating somebody else's drawings.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
Yeah, but like, you know, just that, right? Like fan art. Like fan art is art.
Yes.
Like there are fan artists who are doing things that are like so much more interesting and innovative than the actual artists who are like working on the product.
Yeah.
But again, like there's those hierarchies that tell us that like no, like because it's derivative or because it's using the same character that it's like not important. Yeah, it's less important. It's like not worthy of like critical analysis in the same way. And like there's plenty of people like working to like break that idea or that misconception about like fan art, but that's still something that like you're not gonna like see that in MoMA.
No. Well, one day I hope that my fan fiction is published after I die, so that I can't be alive to see it and be embarrassed.
At the Joslin, we just hired a new European curator, and she and I were just talking today about the artist Thomas Hirschhorn, who has consistently for decades now basically like fanboyed over philosophers and like made these like artistic shrines to them. Yeah. And she and I were talking a little bit about how in historians and art historians, there's this illusion that you are objective and that you have to be objective and that you can't be a fan of whoever you're writing about. Yeah. But increasingly now, there's this kind of like push to be like, no, it's okay to like be a fan of the thing that you're a scholar in. Like, so he's kind of like trying to change that with his like weird fanboy shrine artworks. Yeah. And I really like that. I just like it when people are passionate about stuff and writing from a place of passion.
Do you guys find that from your past you sort of feel like there are really heavy influences in what you're doing now? It's like for me, I can easily identify, you know, certain movies or certain philosophies in a book that I read that are just so present in my work now. And do you guys feel like you have that as well?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think any of the art that I like directly is reflected in what I'm doing, but I am drawn to a particular kind of like novel. Like all of my top 5 novels are like The Bell Jar, like The Picture of Dorian Gray, Madame Bovary. Like people die in them. It's like it's very bleak, and it's like the self-sacrificing artist. Like, but mostly because I'm like interested in that idea that we have of like genius, of like artistic genius, and like, you know, why are people the way that they are? Like, why do people always have to talk about a woman's biography when they talk about the products that she made? And like, so I think like I'm like the art that I like invokes those questions once again, right? Like, who is the maker of this? And why? Like, why do people think that's important? Like, in class, I'm always so interested when people are like, well, we don't know anything about the director. Like, I can't possibly analyze this film. And I'm like, yes, you can. Yeah. You don't need to know anything about the director. But, like, people have this impulse. And I feel like those works, like, are that conflation of, like, art and biography. Where, like, you know, you can't read The Bell Jar without thinking of Sylvia Plath's background. You can't think of Picture of Dorian Gray without thinking about Oscar Wilde's, like, queerness. And so like for me it's the like those artworks that just like they bring up the same questions.
I think it's funny because we talk about that in art history classes a lot too, because it's like, you know, we always talk about Ana Mendieta's biography, but we never talk about Carl Andre's biography. And it's like, you know, is it important that his dad was like a guy who worked in a factory and he makes art out of factory materials? No, it's not, because his biography doesn't matter. But Ana Mendieta and where she grew up, that matters. Like that, it's just so like,
or like that this woman was divorced. And,
exactly.
Or that she was a spinster and she never got married.
So it makes me angry, but it's really interesting to like think about that. I had a much stupider answer for.
I mean, my answers are also kind of dumb. So
for influences. Okay, I help out with this program with teenagers at the Joslin, the Ken Bellows program, and I was talking to them about SpongeBob SquarePants and about how, you know, I think that the biggest artistic influence of my entire life was my early childhood watchings of the early seasons of SpongeBob when they do like a really big close-up on their face and it's like really grotesque and like there's all these like boils and stuff that you didn't see earlier.
I know exactly what scene you're talking about.
Well, they do it all the time. Yeah. And it's just like crusty eyeballs and like boogers and all this. And I'm just like, I love that as a kid. And I still draw like that. Like, you know, it'll be someone who's like really smooth, in my comics at least. And then the next panel, they'll be like really lumpy and gross. And I'm really interested in like the idea of bodies and like how they're just like kind of icky and like interesting in all these ways. And so I think that SpongeBob is my number one influence.
Nice. Wow. That makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Actually, it's funny because if you rewatch it, it's like, yep, I
can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For what I can first think of, it would be things like Watership Down for me.
So
Because it's something that is on the surface cute. It's cute
But
bunnies.
bleak.
But boy,
AF.
yeah, and there's a lot of political underlayers to it, and then obviously the Studio Ghibli stuff. I've never stopped loving any of that, and yeah, I think those two are the main ones, and then Sailor Moon. I did really like Sailor
Moon's
Moon.
awesome.
Yeah, and yeah, clearly I'm a big fat nerd, so Sailor Moon is
But I
still-
think like something that I've noticed that you like a lot is kind of like unconventional imagery, and I like it too. It's like why we like Murakami books
Yes.
and like
my favorite
Ghibli
author.
stuff. Yeah, because I think there's a lot of recycling of imagery and tropes, and so kind of sometimes like going outside Western culture or going outside like the traditional like modes of storytelling kind of give you a little bit more interesting imagery,
Yeah,
and it doesn't have to make sense.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, so that's why I like surrealist stuff now. That's my current kick.
I got a
Oh,
book for you.
Ooh, yay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for talking to me.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you live here.
In my house.